I'm here today with a story that continues in our series about followers of Jesus. So last week we heard the story of Priscilla, and the week before that I think was Paul and Silas. And Priscilla was friends with Paul. So we are continuing on in this series of people that followed Jesus in the early church after Jesus died and rose again. But before we get into that, I want to officially welcome you to the Godly Play Circle. It's been a little while since we were doing it as a Godly Play story, so why don't we take a moment to get ourselves ready, take a deep breath. All right, are you ready? Okay, and then the other thing we do to start our time together is say, "The Lord be with you."
And also with you.
If you hear them, I have a couple helpers working the camera today. So today's story is about a man named Augustine. It can also be said Augustine. Either way is correct. And he lived in the 300s. So if Jesus was around the time 0 to 100, he was in between that. We are now in 2020. So the year 300 seems like a big number, but it was a really, 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 really long time ago. It was only a couple hundred years after Jesus lived. So Augustine lived in the late 300s, early 400s, and he lived most of his life in North Africa, in what's now the country of Algeria. So this map is showing the Roman Empire in around 300 to 600-ish, and it's showing where Christianity had spread. So he was in this blue section here. He was not a Christian when he was growing up, but his mom was. She always prayed for him. We're going to hear a little bit more about that. So when he was growing up in this part of North Africa, one night he was playing with his friends, and they were bored of all the normal things they had been playing. And they decided to go steal some pears from a tree. And they weren't really hungry. These weren't anything special pears. In fact, they even had money. They could have gone and bought pears if they wanted to. But they just wanted the fun of stealing them. Now, this kind of was a weird thing for Augustine, and he kept thinking about this time of stealing pears all the rest of his life. So when he was a boy, he didn't really like school. He got in trouble, but he did love words, and he was a great speaker and writer. In some ways, his life was easy. His family didn't have to worry about money, but in other ways, that gave him other challenges. Women liked him. He loved them. He had good friends, but those things didn't make him happy, and he had a lot of big questions about life. He graduated from college in Carthage, which is this other dot here in the dark blue, and then he moved to Rome, which is in what we now call Italy. And at the time, Rome is the center of the Roman Empire. That's where a lot of important people lived, and people who were great speakers and teachers, and he wanted to learn from them. And he would listen to all different philosophers and find out what their ideas were, and he would try to follow them for a time, but none of their ideas really answered the big questions that he had. He wondered, who is God? And what does God want from us? And why is there evil? What's God like? How does he respond? So after some time, he moved with his family. His mother had come also to Rome, and she was always praying for him, even though he wasn't a Christian yet. And they moved to Milan, which is in the northern part of what is now Italy. And so after they were in Milan, they met a man named Ambrose. And Ambrose was also a great speaker. And so Augustine wanted to go hear him speak. He was a great speaker. And Ambrose preached about God, and Augustine listened. So the more Augustine learned about God, the more he wanted to know, and the more he longed to be good, but he was so terrified he could never be good enough. He felt like something inside of him wanted to do wrong instead of right. He kept thinking about when he was a child and the pears. He thought, if he had done that as a child, just for the thrill of breaking the rules, was there any hope for him as an adult? So one day, Augustine was sitting with a friend in a garden behind his friend's house, and all these questions were spinning through his head. And he was so frustrated, he began to cry, and he said, God, will I ever stop wanting to do these bad things? And then, from the yard next door, he heard some children singing a little chant, and they said, take and read, take and read. And at first he thought it was a song that was like for a children's game, like Ring Around the Rosie or something. But he couldn't remember ever having heard a song that said, take and read. And he thought, maybe this is God answering my prayer. Maybe this is God speaking to me. And so what he did is he took a book that he found and he read it. And he opened it up, and what he read was part of Paul's letter to the Romans. And he read a section that said, where Paul was writing, and he said, let's walk in the light. Have nothing to do with wild parties and arguments and jealousy. Instead, let's be like Jesus. And as Augustine read those words, light filled his heart, and the shadows of his doubts seemed to drift away. He really believed in God, and he knew that God would have answers for his big questions. So shortly after, he was baptized, and his son got baptized along with him, and a friend of his also. And he was baptized in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And that was very important to him, that he was baptized in the name of the Trinity. And he wrote about the Trinity, and he would write that God was love. All of God was love, but it was love in three parts. The one who loved, the one who was beloved, and love itself. So, and he knew that God made us also to be full of this love so that we could love God and love others. After some time, he went back. So he had been in Rome and Milan. He went back to North Africa and in a town called Hippo, a seaside town. There's an H right there. And that's why he's called St. Augustine of Hippo. He became a priest and then the bishop there. And he became a very important speaker and writer and a great leader in the church. And he wrote tons and tons of books that are so important that people still read them now all over the world. In fact, I had to pull this out of my bookshelf. I actually have a book that he wrote, and I read this earlier this year. People who become pastors or leaders in the church learn a lot by reading the words of St. Augustine. Now, of course, this isn't the actual book that he wrote, right? People keep reading and reprinting the things that he wrote so that we can learn of his ideas. Augustine wrote, one of his famous prayers is that he said, God, you made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they can find rest in you. So we remember Augustine because he was restless and found rest in God. And I just want to close. With some wondering questions. So I would invite you to talk about these with your family and friends. I wonder what part of Augustine's story you liked the best. I wonder what part of the story was most important. I wonder what part of the story is about you, or where you might be in the story. I wonder if we could leave out any part of the story and still have everything we need?